Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is a video on C++ and learning C++. I am using REPL.it, REPL.it. So if you want to create your own little C++ REPL to follow along, that's where you would go do it. Okay, and then you can have a little environment like this without having to download C++ compilers and libraries and all that stuff. You can just do it all in your browser. Well, I do have a C++ compiler installed on my computer and stuff. I just figured this is faster. You know, when it comes to compile languages, using the online REPL just seems like a little bit of smoother way. And if you want to have the dark theme and change the sizing of your fonts, that's all here. So you just click this little gear icon and gives you all these options. And yeah, so let's walk through it. So I recommend, this is not necessarily, if this is your first programming language, this is not the video series for you. If you're using my videos, what I recommend is that first you watch the JavaScript video series, learn how to use JavaScript, get used to all the programming concepts in JavaScript, and then do the other languages. So I would just do the JavaScript set of videos, then go over to the C videos to learn C, because C++ is literally just C with classes. That's actually was his original name, C with classes. So most of the concepts I covered in C, as far as like if statements and loops. And I'm not going to necessarily spend that much time on those again, just on the things that where it's different or different or new, which is really only a few little things. So very similar to C, you're going to use the hashtag include to include libraries. And just what I didn't mention before is that whenever it sees these hashtags, these are like compiler messages. Like basically, they don't get handled when the program runs; they get handled when the compiler runs. So when the compiler sees this, it says, "Okay, let me include this library in the code base, so that way this code can function." And like C, it all starts with a main function. Okay, it looks for a main function. That's where the compiler begins. And the main function returns an integer, which is why at the end of the program, it should return 0, although in C++ that return is implied if you don't put it out there explicitly. Now in C, you use printf to print stuff to the console. One of the things I don't like about C++ is that its default library IOStream has this weird syntax. Okay, so this just means standard characters out, okay, or console out. And instead of just doing a parentheses like a normal function, basically what you're doing is you're kind of like saying, hey, this string is going into this function, so it's out. Okay, then later on there's also CIN, characters in, which just use the arrows in the opposite direction. Like there is a logic to it in the sense that like, yeah, okay, characters in, characters out, arrows pointing in the right direction, but it's like not consistent with the rest of the language, which always annoys me. Okay, but that just runs hello world. It's going to say, hey, hello world on the screen. So if I run this code right now, there you go, you get hello world. Okay, you see how it takes a second to like load up, because C and C++ are compiled languages. So even on REPL, what it has to do is first compile it, then run the compiled file. Now, usually that would take 2 commands. If it was on my computer, I'd have to like first do the command to compile it, then do the command to run the compiled file. Yeah. While interpreted languages like Python, JavaScript, Ruby, those languages run right away because they're meant to be read and run at the same time. Just that way, as you explore the different languages here in REPL, you get an idea why some feel slower than others. Oftentimes, it's actually the languages that create faster programs that are slower to run, and vice versa. Because compiled versus not compiled, interpreted. Okay, cool. Otherwise, everything's the same. I can assign variables by just declaring them. So if I want to declare an integer variable, I'll just say, hey, int my int equals 5. And again, you need semicolons after everything. Okay, float my float equals 6.6. Bool. So now we actually have formal booleans. My bool equals true. Okay, and Like you might have noticed that like true wasn't a value when I did if statements in C. So here we actually have an enum that I for Boolean, which is true and false. Bool, you guys get the idea. Then you have car, okay, which will say my car, and that's a single letter. A, and I think in C++ we actually may have a string. Let's see here. String, no, we don't. So I'm assuming string is still going to work as before. So string, my string equals hello world. So far that looks correct. Okay, because again, a string is an array, so the square brackets always mean array. So a string, like hello world, is a string of characters, is an array of characters. So to save a string, you're going to use this syntax. Okay, in a variable. Okay, so that's kind of like variable declaration, and then you have, you know, your if statements. So if something is true, then we can say standard out. This is true. Let me put a new line character at the end of that. And then else if it was false. This is false. Okay. So now if I run this code, see this is true because this true evaluates as true, of course. So it says this is true. But if I change this to false, or any kind of expression that resolves to false, this is false. Okay, so if statements will do one thing if it's true, one thing, something else if it's false. Okay, and then you got loops, same as before. So what's my integer at? My int is 5, so we'll do while my int is less than 10, we will count, and I'm going to assume interpolation works the same way. So we'll say my int is percentage digits, and then we're going to put, it's interesting, it's not in parentheses, so I don't know if this will work. So we have to do it this way. My int is, then we have to do this. My int is my int, and then put the new line character. Because I should compile, like basically say, okay, this, and this is concatenation. Okay, and after each loop, because if I don't add this, it's going to be an infinite loop. My int, we add 1 to my int. That's what the 2 pluses equals a, what's called an increment. So let's run that. This is false. Oh, I did the new line character wrong. And there you go, see my int is 5, my int is 6, my int is 7, my int is 8, my int is 9. And then when it turns into 10, the loop breaks, because again, only runs if my int is less than 10. So you have while loops, and then you have for loops, for int I equals 0, as long as I is less than 10. And then every time the loop goes around, we're going to add 1 to I. And all we're going to do each time is, I'm just copy this line to save myself some typing. Except now we're going to say I is I. And see, now I don't have to put the extra line of my int plus plus, because it's kind of right here saying I gets added 1. So first it's 0, then 1, then 2, then 3. So we run it and see I is 0, 1, 2, 3. Kind of works the same way. Just again a little bit more succinct. So you have those loops. Functions still work the same way. So if I want to create a function, say I want to create a function that returns a number. Okay, so int my func. We'll call this add add nums. We're going to add two numbers. I put in two arguments, or put in two parameters. So I'm going to say, hey, it takes an int that's x and an int that is y. And I just want it to return x plus y. There we go. We need some semicolons here. There we go. And then I can use that function. Okay, in this case, we're just going to say add nums. We're going to add nums 5 and 6. So basically, here we'll print out the result of 5 and 6, which should be 11, and then go to a new line. So let's run that. Let's see, there we go. So we define this function. These numbers get passed into this function. So 5 becomes x, 6 becomes y, 5 plus 6 equals 11. So then this really means 11. So we print 11 to the screen. So yeah, so all that's pretty much the same as it was in C. Nothing all that different. Really, so far the only real big difference is the fact that now we do have a value of true and false instead of having to use zeros and ones, and that the standard way of outputting stuff to the console is using this. So I'm going to leave that there. I'll see you guys in the next video where we'll talk about classes. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.